Welcome back to part two of our worldie unboxed the Founders Edition episode that featured Conor Ryan from xplate. In the first half, Conor shared his journey from a marketing career to co-founding an innovative fitness and recovery brand. Now, Aaron and I will break down the key insights from the conversation, exploring how Conor's marketing background, entrepreneurial spirit, and approach to product innovation resonate with our own experiences at Worldie. Stay connected by visiting worldiebrand.com and subscribing to our YouTube channel for behind the scenes content and more great conversations. All right, let's dive into part two. All right, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I kind of actually like one of your questions as as the initial question.
Okay.
So why do you believe that a lot of people take an indirect approach to getting started with entrepreneurship? So instead of just right out of the gate starting a company, they start their career in something else like advertising, like Connor, or law, like you, or consulting like me before then going off and going full time with an entrepreneurial venture.
I think part of it has to do with people trying to get a baseline level of expertise. So before embarking on a venture, they feel like they have to do a little bit of work in that field. One, to kind of gain that experience and to be able to utilize that knowledge and that information that they've gained for their own venture. And then two, from like a credibility standpoint, like having no experience in that particular field probably doesn't bode well for them, at least in their mind. So it's best to kind of get a little bit of experience so that you can, one, apply that knowledge to your venture, and then two, leverage that knowledge as credibility. So I think people kind of do that simply because they think they need to get those things done. And I know you mentioned like in your conversation with Connor that there's like a checklist of things that people feel like they need to see before making that leap. And I feel like those are two things on the checklist that people feel like, hey, I must have this prior to jumping off into a venture, whether it's like social pressures or just like self, doubting themselves and not really realizing that they can kind of do these things and learn on the go. So those are probably the reasons why people take an indirect approach, at least in my in my understanding. What about you? What do you consider reasons why people take a serpentine path towards entrepreneurship?
I think the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about this was just risk. So going directly into entrepreneurship, like it can seem really risky, whereas saying like, okay, I'm gonna go work at a startup first, or I'm gonna work in marketing at a big company and then work in marketing at a startup and then start my own company. I think that just to a lot of people feels a lot more comfortable. And it's kind of like baby steps to get there versus just jumping right into entrepreneurship. It can feel like a lot and it's super risky. Like maybe you don't have the money just starting out. There's a lot of different kind of like factors that make entrepreneurship risky or scary. So I think that's one thing. And then also, entrepreneurship, there's a ton of different ways that you can go. So you could do B2B versus B2C. There's a ton of different industries that you could go after. So just kind of like understanding where you want to be in that space, like that can take some time to understand what you like, what you're good at, where you feel like there's opportunity, and spending some time in this industry that you're interested in or just in entrepreneurship in general, it can help you understand kind of like where you want to go and where you feel like you have strengths. So I think that's also a factor because a lot of people say that they're interested in entrepreneurship, but they don't really know it's a big thing, right? So it's kind of like saying you're interested in law. There's a ton of different ways that you can go within law, and before you kind of like talk to people, go through law school, figure out what you like and what you don't like, it'd be hard to just pick one thing and go after it. So I think that's also a factor of it.
Yeah, I can definitely buy that. And I was doing one of the taboo communication like things that you're not supposed to do, and trying to formulate what I was going to say in response while I was listening to you. And one of the things that I thought about was like, okay, ignorance is also a piece of it. Like, and it's not like ignorant in a bad sense, but ignorance in terms of like not knowing that this opportunity actually exists until you get into that field. And when you start actually getting into that field, then you understand like, oh, there's an opportunity here. And then I can take this leap. So like they're not necessarily looking for entrepreneurship right out of the gate. Like this is not something that they were quote unquote passionate about. But when they got into the industry and they started seeing some of the shortcomings or some pain points that weren't being addressed, then that's when they kind of got that entrepreneur bug. They're like, all right, let's go out and like fix this. I can do this. I can make this change. I can make this tweak. I can address this pain point. And all that came about because they were able to actually be, engrossed in that particular industry. And then is some of it is like a result of kind of being thrust into the situation. So I remember like there's a couple of people that we talked to and their entrepreneurial like careers started because they were fired from their their jobs. Like, all right, now what? Like, what am I going to do now? These are my skills. It's very hard for me to kind of get a job right now, at least at the level that I think that I deserve, or at least at what I want. And so they end up jumping into entrepreneurship because they're kind of pushed into it. So I think there are other ways or reasons why the indirect approach is a very common approach to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, similar to kind of your last 2 points, I think something else is people get into these other careers and they're kind of like, I have no autonomy, or I'm tired of dealing with bureaucracy or having like 5 layers of kind of like people above me before a decision is made. So I like with each layer, like there's less and less ownership over kind of that decision and what actually happens, and you're more and more removed from the business. So you could have people who go into an industry and think like this is really interesting, and then they get into it and they're like, well, I don't actually do anything that's meaningful. Like I want more for my career. And then that almost pushes them into entrepreneurship or something a little bit more entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I can buy that. Uh, Flipping over to a piece that you mentioned during your first answer in terms of the determining the success of a startup. What do you think is the most important factor, or number of factors when kind of determining the success of a startup? And maybe we can kind of do it from this type of perspective, a Monday morning quarterback looking back at it and saying like, okay, these are some of the characteristics of successful startups.
I think so. I know we talked about this with someone else. I think it was Chip, in an earlier conversation. And I've kind of like reflected on it a lot as we talk to a bunch of different people and they talk about like what makes a successful startup. I think, especially like looking backwards, like having a really clear problem that you're solving and a problem that is
Hmm.
like really acutely felt by customers. I think that's super important. And then kind of like to solve that problem, having a super differentiated solution.
Yeah.
And then basically when you combine all those things together, it's kind of like it's not that the product sells itself, but you don't have to do a ton of education. You don't have to do a ton of explaining why this is better than what's on the market or why people should be wanting this product. It's almost like people are like, where has this product been my whole life, or this solution, whatever it is. So for me, that's really what makes like a very successful or like home run of an idea or startup. And I think there are a lot of companies that have like elements of all those things, but maybe not all of them. But I think if you could tick all those boxes, then you're gonna have a really successful company.
Yeah. That's right. I think what my answer is right in line with that. So you mentioned differentiated product, so you're talking about like a nuance of the product, and I think product, my answer is like product in general, but differentiation is certainly an important characteristic of a product, a successful product, at least in my mind. And so I think that's like one of the most significant components of a successful business is having like a really strong product. And part of a strong product is being differentiated, like not being you know, necessarily a commodity that can be replaced or is easily like worked around. So like I think those type of products tend to lead to successful ventures. Another factor, and so that's why I threw that caveat of multiple factors. Another factor would be the people, so like the team, and you can come up with like a really good product. And we've seen companies, and you guys mentioned one during your conversation, Solo Stove. So they came up with like a pretty good product. So you have a really good product, but then that's it. Like there's no iteration. There's nothing different. You don't build on it. You don't do any kind of like extension into something else. And part of that is because you probably don't have the team to do that. You don't have a really good group of people. And a successful venture continues to iterate, whether it's like a tech business like Google, it continued to iterate and it continued to like morph into something else and grew from more than just like a search engine to now they do a whole bunch of stuff. You can wear Google now with I don't know Google glasses if it's still around, but like it's just that like you continue to iterate, you continue to grow, and that's because of the people that you have working for your organization. So I think people and product are probably two of the most important factors, not the only things, but like I think two of the most important factors when determining a successful startup or like looking back and saying like, oh, that startup was successful. Here are some of the reasons, and people and product will probably show up on the vast majority, if not all of those lists.
Yeah.
And now, kind of like piggybacking on the people answer and building those teams that are really going to take you to that next level. What in your mind, since we're is relevant to us right now as we're trying to build our team, what's the toughest part of creating a team?
I think the toughest part, it's kind of similar to what we were talking about before with, or like we've talked about this in the past. With the product, it's like knowing when good enough is good enough and not getting overly fixated on the perfect person because the perfect person doesn't really exist. So it's like knowing when, because with people, when you bring someone onto your team, it's kind of taking a leap of faith. So understanding when does it make sense to actually take that leap of faith? When are potential, I don't want to say red flags, but things that are a little bit concerning? At what point can you overlook those versus when are they deal breakers? And I think also just being ready because we've heard a lot that you want to hire slow and fire fast.
Hmm.
And we've done a good job of hiring slow because we haven't hired yet.
Yeah,
But we have to be prepared to fire fast too if things don't work out. So I think that will be a hard part about
yeah.
building a team, just like figuring out really quickly if it's not a good fit and then just moving on because that's uh what makes the most sense for both sides. So all of those things I think are what for me what makes building a team tough.
Yeah, your answer influenced mine. I think the most difficult part of it, at least I envision, is the firing fast component. Like if it's not a match, kind of like whittling down your team to that like core group that's going to be very successful and get you to that next stage. It's very easy to kind of like make those type of decisions, especially in like a classroom setting. So going back to like the B school and we'd go through these case studies and we'd look at these different companies, these different organizations and startups, and we'd see things that they screwed up on, and we would see like reasons why they were screwing it up. And a lot of it lied with like a couple of individuals within the organization. And we could easily say, like, hey, you need to just get rid of Jeff, or you should have fired like Sarah a long time ago. And it's very easy to say that when we're so removed from them. But now talking to people, building these relationships, kind of going down and rolling up our sleeves together and doing the work. And then a week or a month or 2 months or a year down the road, having to cut ties with them. Now I can see like that's going to be very difficult. Like it's not just so cut and dry. It's not black and white. It's not a case study. It's real life. And so that becomes a much more difficult obstacle to overcome than perhaps we originally anticipated, because it seems so easy. Like, oh yeah, we can fire fast. We can easily do that. If it's not working out, we're not going to let this guy just continue to screw up. We're not going to let this girl like continue to like sink the boat. We're gonna throw him overboard. Like it's gonna be easy. I think realization's beginning to kind of set in that that's not that's not going to be the case. It's going to be much more difficult. As difficult as it has been to find a good fit and to really like hire somebody, I think it's going to be even that much more difficult to kind of let someone go.
100%. Yeah, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah. So looking at, I guess, bringing on a third co-founder, another member of the team, what are the three most important attributes or characteristics of a potential co-founder? Like what should they exude? And is there any kind of room for compromise from our perspective?
I think for me, the first thing that I think about is, and I don't know the perfect way to articulate this, but it's basically like scrappiness. So
Hmm.
an ability to just get things done, even when things are tough, when we don't have experience doing it, when it feels like we don't really know where to go, when things are ambiguous, just being able to push things forward, make progress, get things done. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this kind of like enables that first trait, but just passion. I think that's super, super important. Like you could have the smartest person and like the most capable footwear professional ever, super smart, super capable, but I don't know if I would want that person as a co-founder if they
Hmm.
don't believe in our idea and if they're not passionate about it. Um, because I think passion, like obviously it allows you to work harder and I guess have faith even when things are going tough. But I think also like you just feel if someone has passion or not, and that energy is contagious, right? Like negative and positive energy. So if someone is just doing it to, to have equity or because they want a co-founder position on their resume,
Yeah.
and I think we can feel that, and it's not as fun when you're working with people who are not passionate about what you're doing. Um, and then I think the last thing for me is combination of having vision and being able to think about strategy, but at the same time, implementing tactics and executing like on a day-to-day basis, being able to do both of those things. I think that's super important too. So those are the three things that I would look for in a co-founder, and they're pretty, I guess, like general and high level where I feel like
Yeah.
we don't need to compromise on them.
Yeah.
So for me, like I don't think there is a ton of room for compromising on those things. If someone doesn't have one of those traits, then I would think about them as potentially a contractor, an advisor, or some other kind of role. But for a co-founder, I feel like that's almost the bare minimum for me.
No, I think that's right. And all three of the things that you listed are kind of synonymous with every single thing that I feel like a co-founder should have. So, like the first thing that I thought about was flexibility, like a high degree of flexibility, and that correlates with scrappiness. So, being able to understand that not the way we plan in which we plan something may not be the way in which we actually execute. We might have to make some tweaks. We might have to make some changes, pivot. We've pivoted before, and all that requires a understanding that we have to be flexible. So that individual should have like a very flexible mindset. And I think that's sort of coincides with scrappiness, like being able to do a lot with a little, or to kind of go in and get yourself or get your hands dirty or whatever. The other two things were aptitude. So kind of like the knowledge, so the wherewithal to be able to provide value to the company, to the organization, to be able to do the job. We need like a level of aptitude, and it doesn't mean they have to come in knowing everything, because we didn't come in knowing pretty much anything about like the shoe industry. It's just like an ability to learn that stuff and to learn it like on the fly, um, to adapt, and maybe that correlates again with my flexibility point. But I think those two are extremely important. And the last one is very important is attitude, and that goes with like passion. Like the type of attitude that we would require would be like a passionate one, someone who's bought in, who believes, who's willing to see this all the way through. And that's to me, those three things are non-negotiables. Like those are things that, like you mentioned, those are table stakes. That's what you would have in order to kind of get in the door as a co-founder.
Yep, 100%. And then, so
So,
we've talked a lot about kind of potential failure in the
mhm,
future and whether we have a fear of failure, just how we're thinking about that. But
yeah.
Connor was talking a little bit about kind of like areas where they failed in the past, or, they've learned things the hard way. So what are some areas where, or examples of things where you feel like we failed or learned things the hard way so far in our journey?
Failure to launch. I think that was like a rom-com or something.
Yep.
But we've had a difficult time of getting this product out to the public for various reasons. Some of it self-induced because we wanted to make some tweaks or we weren't happy with where the direction of the shoe. Some of it was outside of our control because, the factory was unresponsive and we had to pivot and change from one factory to the next. Either way, like I think it's been a point that has come to a head several times, not being able to launch even after we made somewhat public announcements about it. Not launching has been one of like our biggest, I guess, quote unquote failures to this point. um I think it actually works out that we haven't launched yet because it's given us opportunities to get the product right. And we've mentioned several reasons in the past why getting the product right is so important for us. And maybe it's specific to us, and not every startup has to worry about like getting this first iteration, correct, or this first product correct at launch. But for us, we felt like it's very important simply because our target audience really kind of requires it us, and because our experience almost dictates it, because we want to get that type of credibility or maintain or achieve that type of credibility in the space. So I think it actually works to our benefit, but it has like prevented us from moving to that next step. Not launching has kept us from like moving forward. And so once we're over that hurdle, even if it's just a soft launch, which is like a crowdfunding, a Kickstarter event, like once we get past that step, then I think it's going to feel like a momentous occasion because so much has like come and been blocked by this huge hurdle of launch that we just haven't been able to overcome.
Yep. I think that's right. That is definitely a big one. And I mean, it's almost like the elephant in the room because
Yeah.
I wasn't even considering it when I was thinking about areas
Yeah.
where we failed. I was thinking about like smaller things. So, there's been certain times where we wanted someone to join our team and we failed to entice them to join. We thought we were going to be able to produce in the US or in North America. Weren't
Yeah.
able to do that, at least not initially. And then with our kind of like the shoe that we currently have, we're going to change this, but we failed to make it easy to get in and out of. So,
Yeah.
there's been little failures along the way, but I think all of them we can learn from and overcome, at least thus far.
Yeah, I guess I was macro failures, but that we've had a series of micro failures, and I kind of see those as like learning points. Just like, okay, you're gonna have to like test these things at a certain point, and then from a personal standpoint, the same thing kind of comes into play. Like you got to test like your ability to analyze whether or not this person's a good fit, your ability to communicate like our values in a way that's attractive enough for an individual to come and join the team. All those things kind of like are like test situations, and I guess yeah, they chalk up as failure, but I still feel like they're just part of the process of learning, of building like a culture and understanding like, all right, how we want to create this brand, how do we want to build this business. I think yeah, those are failures, but they're failures with asterisks. Like they're failures with like, okay, yeah, they're used to make us better. Even the macro failure of not launching is kind of like a failure with a lesson. So it's not just like, oh yeah, we just didn't do it and we weren't able to accomplish it and nothing was learned from it. They were definitely for a purpose, and we were able to kind of reuse them for that purpose. So
Yep. And then one other thing that Connor was talking about, he said that he's kind of at a tree in the road,
yeah,
not a fork in the
yeah,
road. So kind of to our discussion a little bit, like just now, we haven't launched yet, but we have done a lot of things. We've made a lot of decisions. Um, so do you think we're past the point of being at a tree in the road? Do you think we're more at a fork in the road, or like how do you think about that analogy and where do we fit into that?
yeah. I think we are at a tree in the road, but I wanna qualify that statement by saying we have a firm belief and vision as to like where we're going and what path we want to take to go there. So we're on the straight and narrow, but we have a lot of other options around us that we can use to get to that point, to get to the top or to the next part of our journey. Like I think, yeah, we're at like a tree in the road. It's not like, oh, one way or the other. We've got a lot of different choices, a lot of different decisions that we can make in order to get to that point that we feel like a success, but we also have an idea of the route. Like we know where we want to go. And in that sense, I feel like we're on the straight and narrow. So yes and no regarding the tree in the road. Fork, I don't think I think that's more like a black and white. Like we can either choose this way or that way. Like I don't know if that ever really comes about. Like I feel like there's always several choices. There's always going to be several different courses of action. And that's what makes decision making so difficult because it's not just the 50-50 quarter flip. It's going to be like a lot of different like awesome choices out there, or at least they look to be like awesome choices and very attractive. And so it's going to be very difficult for us to make those type of decisions. And I wish it were like I wish it was just a fork in the road, but it's unfortunately a tree that you've got to like navigate all these various choose your own adventure paths that you can go on. So
Yeah, so I think that I also think we're at a tree in the road. I think we've gone up the trunk and then down one of the branches, but not so far that we're stuck or anything like that. And,
right.
in the past, we've maybe gone up the wrong tree and then got knocked down either involuntarily or voluntarily once we learned something or someone told us something. So I think now we're on the right tree. We think we're on the right branch, but if we learn something new, I feel like we could do like a small pivot and go on to another branch and then kind of go up that branch instead. So like you were saying, there's always a ton of different options that are in front of
Yeah.
you. And I think we've kind of narrowed it down on where we want to focus. But some of the smaller decisions, there's still, some uncertainty or just like things that we have to figure out. But I think we have a pretty good sense of where we've been, where we are, and where we want to go. So we're on that tree, but we think we know each branch that we want to kind of follow.
Yeah, I think that's right. And kind of sticking with or going back to the personnel because it's really relevant to us now as we're interviewing people at the moment, not to date this particular episode, but we're like interviewing people for the role of co-founder, for the role of coming on as a I guess a member of the team, and they're going to be some really like attractive like candidates and applicants and how to like to navigate and or weed through and find the right one. And it kind of gets me back or makes me think about a situation back when I was playing football. We would have like walkthroughs the day before a football game. And so the walkthroughs, you would just be in a helmet and a t-shirt, and you're going at about 60, maybe 70% speed and kind of walking through a lot of the plays that you were hoping to run the next day at the game. And we would have these guys, and most of them wouldn't even be starters, who instead of going 60 or 70%, they'd be running full speed. They'd go 100%. And we're, again, we're in t-shirts, and they might actually like hit somebody in one of the starters. And whenever they did hit one of the starters, we had a coach who would go ballistic. He would go angry and like he would call these guys T-shirt All-Americans. And he said he didn't want to see any T-shirt All-Americans, and like he'd make a big point, and it would be like, oh, these T-shirt All-Americans, the guys who show up on walkthroughs, but they're ghosts during like practice and football games. How do we weed through T-shirt All-Americans, people who look really good on paper, they interview really well, but then when it's time to put the pads on, they're nowhere to be found. Like they're MIA. Like how do you think we? I mean, there's probably no great way to do it. There's probably several different methods that you have to utilize, and some of it is trial and error. But like, how do you weed through T-shirt All Americans?
I think it's tough in the interviewing process. Like if they're interviewing really well, if they have really good resumes, like it's probably hard to weed them out before you're potentially uh extending an offer to them. But I think it's just kind of like giving people a lot of responsibility up front and having high expectations from the start. And if they're not meeting those expectations, then having those conversations as early as possible and kind of like telling them what you expect and where they're not necessarily meeting those expectations. And then if they're not able to meet them and you kind of realize that they're a t-shirt all American, then I think at some point you just have to let them go.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know if I have too much to add to that. I think that's probably the best method or group of methods in order to kind of get yourself to a good position and make sure that you're not bringing on a team full of T-shirt All Americans. Um, some of it is like asking for references, being able to see whether or not on their other teams were they showing up. But yeah, other than that, I don't know if I have anything to add. I think it's probably a combination of trial and error, a careful evaluation, or really listening and being able to be present and cognizant during their interview portion, asking the right questions to see and suss out if they're going to be one of those teammates who only show up on Thursdays or if they're going to be there on Friday night. So I think I think that's right.
Yeah, and I think also like with sports, maybe it's a bit different because if you know everyone else is going 60% and you go 100%, then you know that you're kind of going to stand out. I don't know if in business you can really, you would hope that most people are going close to 100% all the time.
Yeah, the
So,
metaphor doesn't
yeah.
completely work, but
So hopefully someone who's going hard in the interview process, like they're going to go hard once they get the job too. And maybe
yeah,
they're like coachable and we can kind of like coach them into a real All-American. But
yeah.
I don't know. I've never experienced t-shirt All-Americans for myself, so I don't know.
Yeah, no. I think it was maybe it was unique to our school or unique to like to football or whatnot because most football teams do have like pregame walkthroughs. But we definitely had some people who tried to shine during the walkthrough for whatever reason. I don't know. They maybe they felt like that was going to give them some playing time, a last hurrah before the lights came on.
Yeah, yeah, I mean it makes sense. One of the other things that me and Connor were talking a little bit about was this idea of xplate, like his product, whether it replaces someone's home workout, whether it replaces their gym membership, or whether it's just something that adds on. So I think in general, we've thought about our product as a substitute. So it replaces a soccer cleat, a football cleat, a basketball shoe, it's a tennis shoe, whatever. But do you think maybe we're being too limited in our thinking and there's a segment that they want to add this to their kind of like what they're already buying. So it's not replacing everything, but maybe it's like the school shoe or the shoe that their kid wears everywhere, and then they still have sport specific shoes. Do you think maybe we're not like we haven't really thought about that segment and that could be a group of customers that buy our product?
I mean, absolutely. I think that's probably the case that it's going to be used in a way that and we've kind of mentioned this before on, I think, other episodes, it being used in a way that we necessarily didn't intend for it to be used. And I forget about it, but like, I think it was like using something on an airplane. I can't remember. Maybe the thought will come back to me when they weren't necessarily intending it for it to be used in that way. And so it wasn't necessarily meant to be a substitute, but it ended up being that. So for us, Yeah, that could very well be the case where it's being used as a substitute for something that we didn't foresee. But I don't think we're wrong in focusing on creating a product for a specific persona. I think that's the right way to go about it, and not to call the situation that we're just describing, a bonus, but that's kind of how it should present itself, like a cherry on top. Like we were focused on building this product for this target consumer, and we were hyper focused on them, and we really wanted to build value or create value for them. And all of a sudden, it bled into like another segment that we didn't even like recognize as being our target, or in another situation that we didn't realize or recognize as being our target situation that you would use the shoe in. Like I think that's more or less like a bonus. It's like going viral off of like just putting out stuff. Like you don't know that this particular thing is going to be maybe an amateur like myself or you. Like we don't necessarily know that this particular post or this particular video clip or whatever will go viral, but we're just trying to create content, or we're just trying to create a product, and as a byproduct of that, it goes viral, or as a byproduct of that, it's actually a solution for something that we didn't foresee. So like I think those are all just like just happy like accidents, like the painter, right, Ross would say. Like those are just like happy little accidents that occur, and not necessarily intentional on our part. But I don't think we're wrong to focus on a specific consumer and build a product with value for that specific consumer.
I think that's right. I don't think I really have anything to add. I think that, in the past, like I mentioned in my question, we thought that it's really going to be something that in our head we've been like, this is going to replace every sports shoe that a parent has to buy. And I think a lot of parents, they might just not necessarily completely buy into that notion. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
when we do the testing, our product works better on certain surfaces than others. And maybe parents say like, some parents are like, I'm fine with something that's good enough on every surface. And then other parents are maybe like, well, there's certain surfaces where I want my kid to have that advantage or like superior performance. So on that surface, I'm going to buy them a sport or surface specific shoe. So I think it's one of those things where, like you said, we build it for a specific persona, and then we see how people actually use it. We see what the product feedback is, and then adjust our kind of messaging and marketing as necessary, and obviously like tweak the product too. But I think there is some of this that we're just not going to know until we just launch the product.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So in terms of pricing, Connor was saying that he wants to keep his price under $500. And I think it was
Yeah.
because like just from like a psychological standpoint, once you go above 500, it just seems like a lot for a piece of workout equipment. So what do you think is that kind of like price ceiling for us in terms of a price at like just at all costs we want to stay under?
Let's see. I think about it based upon my reaction to other companies' prices for kids' shoes. And this is just as a consumer. And so I would look at their prices and say, like, wow, there's no way I would spend $100 for a kid shoe when my daughter's going to grow out of it in 6 months or less. Like, there's no way. Like, why would I? Or they're going to just tear it up. Like $100 shoe. Like, why? The audacity of these people. And so maybe that's the mark. That's like you know, the point that I don't think we should cross is like the $100 threshold, the three digits. But at the same point, now having been on the other side of things and having to create a product and wanting to create the very best product for what we feel like is a very underserved like segment of the population who kind of get, you know, the literal hand-me-downs, like trying to do that and put so much into it and realizing that the cost for the materials, the cost for production just increases, And if you're going to have any type of margins at all, you've got to also increase your price. And we started with the idea that we're going to be, I want to say like around like $40 or something. It was like, and we've pretty much hit double that now. We're at 80. And I think that to me is like our cap. Like if I can like keep it $80 or less, that's also works in our favor or bodes well when we're trying to educate the consumer to the benefits of the values. Again, we've mentioned in previous conversations that the first iteration will be the highest price that we can charge a consumer because we are building value for a specific consumer, and that consumer is going to see this as a true deal because there's like, oh wow, this replaces three shoes that I typically pay $40 a shoe for, and so in the grand scheme of things, I'm actually saving $40 and not necessarily thinking about like the cost of $80, but they're thinking about the savings of 40. So like that's not going to work with everyone, and so like having it, and it becomes like even harder the higher the price is. So I think for me, not that we're trying to necessarily build a product for everyone out of the gate, but for me, like based upon what I think as value and based upon like where we're headed with the product, I think $80 is like my my ceiling. Like that's where I kind of want to be at. And $100 is like, dude, like what are we doing? Like let's get back to the drawing. What's going on? What do we need to delete? Because this is way too costly. Like there becomes a point where it's just too expensive.
I think for me, it's the exact almost the exact same. So $100 is just kind of like that point where I'm like, I really don't want to bring something into the market that's one like a kid shoe into the market that's $100,
Yeah,
even if it's like super premium, even if we feel like it's the best, because at that point it just feels almost not accessible. So it's
exactly.
like, certain people, like rich people can enjoy this premium product, but everyone else can't. And I don't know if I really want to build a product like that, especially for kids, because like we want all kids to have these experiences. We want all kids to have shoes that fit, that allow them to um engage in all these different activities. And if it's too high to be accessible like at all, then that's not really something that I'm too interested in. And then like 100 is where I'm like, definitely I do not want to be up there. And then anything over 85, I'm also kind of like, I don't, I'm starting to get into that same mindset where it's like, that just seems too high. So I think there's like a $5 band between where you're at and where I'm at. But kind of like you were saying before, we started at, I want to say like 35 or $40. And
Yeah,
we were kind of naive in terms of how much it costs to actually make a shoe. So we didn't kind of like know what you need to price at to stay in business. But if you had asked me back then, I would have probably said like $80 is too high, or like $70 is too high. So
yeah,
um I feel okay about 70, 75, $80, but I think we're kind of bumping up on that threshold where I just don't really want to go too much higher.
absolutely. I think that's exactly where I'm at.
And then one other price related question. So Connor was saying that you don't really know if someone wants to buy your product until you actually offer it to them. And a lot of times they'll be like, this is a great idea. I love what you're building. And then you're like, hey, can you, or would you like to buy it? And they say no. And I've seen that a little bit with trying to find testers for the product. So there's a ton of people who they're like, oh yeah, I really want to help you guys. I want to test out the product. Like I have a kid who this is their shoe size. But some of those people have also said to me, and they don't know kind of like what we're planning on charging, but they're like, yeah, there's this other brand out there. It seems like they make really good shoes, but they're charging like $80. And I would never pay $80 for a kid's shoe. Um, so those are kind of people where it's like, yeah, they want to help you out. They want to like help you out, right?
Yeah,
But it's really they probably just want free stuff and to feel like they're part of something, right? But when push comes to shove, they're probably not going to be a customer. So like, how can we? Is there any way to know and kind of like separate those people out earlier versus engaging them and treating them like potential customers, and then later down the road we realize like, oh, this person just they don't want to become a customer because they think our product is too expensive.
So I guess to kind of clarify a bit, you're talking about engaging them as testers, engaging them as like community builders, but not seeing them necessarily as consumers of the product.
Yeah, like they're part of our community until they realize what the price will be. And then they're like, happy to support you from afar, but I'm not going to buy the product. So I guess just like how should we think about those people and should we be doing anything to kind of like, I don't want to say weed those people out, but just communicate early that this is going to be a premium product and that it's going to be premium pricing. So it's going to be maybe higher than some other options on the market.
Yeah, I think that comes through transparency. Like I think we should definitely be transparent about like what we're doing. And I think we have been. I don't think we've been hiding the ball at all with when it comes to like our intentions. We want to be as open door about it as possible. Um, Hence the reason why we're trying to build in public as well, and also involve people like this into the process. And I think there's a season for all these customers. Like because they're not our customer today, doesn't mean they're not going to be our customer like tomorrow or next year or three years down the road. Like I think as our product grows and matures and expands, it's going to have a much larger footprint. No, like pun intended. So like I think it's going to increase in scope, and we need that type of input. So like they are playing a significant role now. They're providing us that input that is subjective, yes, but it's also providing us like quantifiable and qualitative data that we can use to make the product better today for our target consumer, our customer who does realize the value in the product and who's not like taken aback at the price point because they do see that value. They see this as like a $120 value for 80 bucks. Like, oh, if I pay, you know, for three shoes that cost 40 bucks, then I'm spending this amount. But if I pay for this one shoe and they can use it across three different sports, then I've saved myself some money. Like they see the value in the product, they see the value in the mission, they see the value in like what we're trying to accomplish down the road. They've really bought in. Then to them, it's not really like a hard decision to make. Like the price point doesn't deter them at all. But for those who don't see it that way, they're not necessarily kind of pushed away or shoved into a corner. They still have like a role they can play. And part of that is just like providing feedback because our goal is to expand down the road and include them as well. So hopefully we're able to, once we're at scale, create products that are even more accessible than they are, day one. So I don't think they should be like brushed aside or they don't have a position or a place in the community. They're just a delayed kind of like, you know, I guess they have a delayed position in the community. But even saying that, they can still provide some feedback, some help, right now in order to create that product down the road. So yeah, I mean it sucks that like they aren't our customer right now, but they definitely have a role even today in the community.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really good way to think about it and look at it. So I don't think we need to kind of like weed these people out or make sure they're not part of the community or anything like that. And I think if they want to be part of the community and they're not buying, like you laid out some good ways that they can help us out and we can stay in touch with them as, like you said, as we potentially start to roll out some products that are even more accessible than this initial footwear product.
Yeah. So besides a paying customer, what do you think is the most important like component of maybe our startup or startups in general?
You mean like external or internal or either?
Either.
I would say the founders, like the founding team
Hmm.
and the team behind the scenes are the most important part. Like I was gonna say like the customer, like always the customer, because that's really all that matters. But in order to understand what the customer wants, in order to understand customer feedback, in order to understand how to get in front of the right customers at the right time, you have to have founders or a founding team or contractors, whoever it is, who can do all that stuff and do it in a way where it's like cheap enough where you still have a business that is sustainable. And I don't think any of that is easy. So I think you really have to have a founding team that knows what they're doing. Um, because if you don't, even if you have paying customers, like you could have a ton of paying customers and not be profitable. And if you have that situation for long enough, then your business is going to go under, right? So you have to make the right decisions. You have to run the business in the right way where you can actually like continue to serve customers. So that's the way that I think about it. It's like without paying customers, you don't have a business. And in order to get paying customers and have a profitable business, then you have to have the right team.
I 100% agree. I was kind of hoping that you would go down the product line so I can be like, oh no, that's not the most important part of the business. The people are. So I think that's the case. I'll use like the metaphor of like music, the music industry. So if it were product centric, if product was the best, and most important part of a startup or a venture, then you can kind of equate that to a song. Like the song is the product. That's like what the artist creates. And we've seen a litany of one hit wonders, like people who've created one good product or one good song, and then you kind of never hear from them again. I think it's much more vital or important to have an artist or, in our case, a team because they are able to create hit after hit. They build like a brand. They build something that people kind of flock to the stores or flock to the online tabs for us because they want whatever that person, whatever that team is creating. They believe in that team. The same way people flock to Apple stores when Apple releases a new iPhone. They want what that team is creating, what that company is making. And I think that's the reason why teams are so important because they build your credibility. They create these really awesome, unique, differentiated products that people come to love and expect. And with that level of expectation comes loyalty and return and repeat customers and lifetime value increases. Like all that is a derivative of a really, really good team. And I think that is the most important part or component of a startup.
Yep. And I think like you were talking about product, I think that kind of goes into paying customers. So like if you have paying customers, then you probably have a good product.
Yeah.
Um, so I almost view that as like a subset of paying customers. But yeah, team, it all kind of comes down to team. If you don't have the right team, then you're probably not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. That's why I had to take paying customer out of the equation. Because that would be like an easy cop out answer. Because
Yeah.
there's no business if there's no paying customer.
Yeah. The most important part is making profit. So
Yeah. All right. Last question that I had, and this goes to um, kind of the prototype. So Connor was mentioning in your conversation with him that the prototype that they had, though it looked very similar to their finished product, there was a lot of features that were tweaked and changed and made it a bit better than what they were working with from a prototype standpoint. So what have you noticed in our prototype that kind of needs refining? It may end up looking very similar, the finished product that is, may end up looking very similar to our prototype. But what do you anticipate as being a significant difference between what we have today and what we deliver, 6, 7 months down the road?
I think the main change is going to be how kids get their feet in and out of the shoe
Hmm.
because right now it's super hard to put on and take off. And that's like a non-negotiable for us. Like that's one of the few traits where we're like our shoe has to be easy to put on and take off for parents and for kids. So the way that the opening of the shoe might look different, or we might add certain things just to make that process easier. I think that's the biggest change that you'll see. Um, some areas we probably need to reinforce them. So uh, where there's Velcro, we might have to make it a little bit, maybe increase the surface area, maybe change the shape of the strap a little bit. So there's less, I guess, force on that small area of Velcro just to make sure that it stays connected to the shoe for as long as possible. And then maybe also thinking about ways where if there are certain things that wear out sooner, like the if the Velcro starts to peel off, are there ways where we can design it that allow for parents to easily kind of like repair it or refurbish it, if that's the right word for shoes? And then, as we get more and more people wearing the shoes, seeing areas that just need to be reinforced a little bit. So probably the toe, maybe around the heel, things like that. So I think it's kind of little changes like that. And then maybe certain things aesthetically that need to be cleaned up, just to make sure that it looks like 100%. I don't want to say perfect, but if you look at a lot of shoes on the market, like you don't really notice imperfections. So if there's like even tiny imperfections that we see, just identifying those, communicating that to our development team and getting that fixed. So I think a lot of that stuff you might not even be able to notice unless you're like really taking a detailed look at this initial version and then the next version. But potentially with the way that you get in and out of the shoe, that's something that visually you can easily tell is different.
You ate all the low hanging fruit, so everything's gone. So no, I agree with all of that. There's nothing that I can add. I think those are all the things that we hope to tweak and make changes on, unless again something comes up during this testing phase that parents are able to highlight as like, oh, this is something that needs to be adjusted or tweaked or whatever. So I 100% agree with all that, and I think I've exhausted all my questions, but willing to knock out any ones you have left.
Yeah, I have two more.
Okay.
So me and Connor were talking a little bit about his kind of like really big marketing ideas and how if he had an unlimited budget, he'd want to do almost like Red Bull type content where
Yeah.
you're taking a helicopter to the top of a monument in Monument Valley and then working out or going to the bottom of the ocean and doing workouts, but he doesn't have that type of budget. And we were talking a little bit about like, can you do that in a scrappier way? So maybe you go to a national park, you hike up some kind of difficult mountain and then start doing a workout there, and you get that same kind of effect, but it's not quite as expensive. So, from our perspective, if we had an unlimited budget, what are some splashy things that you would want to do? And like, let's take endorsements off the table. So Michael Jordan, LeBron James, like they're not going to endorse our product. Like, what are some splashy things that you would want to do if we had unlimited budget? And then after that, like, can we do any of those things in a scrappier way with the amount of money that we have today?
Can I, is it a cop out to say like, can I siphon that money away and put it towards the product?
I think that is a cop out.
So I don't know. If we had an unlimited marketing budget, I would probably oh, okay. I just had this idea. So I don't know if you remember back when this idea was still a building the new venture class kind of idea. We had this um I don't know who brought it up, but like we had this idea of going to a soccer tournament, like going to these tournaments, tournaments that we would sponsor, and the winning teams would all like don like worldie gear. Like we'd have them all and like geared up in worldie apparel, including like the shoes, shirt, whatever, and it was only for the winning team because we were like, again, this is like these are early days of the company, and so we were like wanting to be like associating the brand with winners, right or wrong. Now we've become much more inclusive, much more of a a kinder, gentler company or approach. But at the time, we were like, oh yeah, we really want the brand to be associated with winners, so we'd like don every winning team out with like worldie gear. I think we could do something similar. Like if we had an unlimited budget, uh, we can go out and like we could sponsor these tournaments. I think one of them we called like the Worldie Cup or whatever. Like going out and like creating these big huge events that uh, are well publicized that end up attracting so many like youth organizations and teams, and it's all like heavily like branded as a worldly event, and like having them outfitted in apparel, having them outfitted in gear. And I know this skirts the border of endorsements, but like doing that kind of stuff and and maybe like being able to highlight the brand in that way. What we could do now that's like a scrappier version of that is partnering with these like tournaments, is partnering with these organizations, out sometimes schools or whatnot, and being able to at a lower level sponsor these events and hand out free gear, get kids uh, in the shoes, maybe handing out the shoes as like part of like awards or whatever, like maybe doing it in that way allows kids to get it on, um, to provide feedback, to provide awareness, to do the things that we kind of envisioned when we were like ideating about these huge worldy events that we were wanting to hold, but maybe doing it at a smaller, more grassroots scale and kind of doing it and growing organically. So potentially that would be one of the things that I would spend our marketing budget on if we couldn't use endorsements are a huge piece, especially in the sports area. Like that's the best way to kind of grow your brand is by associating it with successful athletes. So that would probably, I know that's something that you carved out as something that we couldn't use it for, but that would probably be the number one. Number two would be hosting these huge events. And on a micro scale now, from a scrappier perspective, we can probably still do that by just partnering with smaller youth organizations.
Yeah, no, I had similar notes. So I was thinking you could host tournaments, you could sponsor a team, you could sponsor a whole league. And then I was also thinking like you could have some kind of contest. So like punt pass kick, for example,
Hmm.
or almost like an all-star skills competition type of thing where there's a bunch of different game like mini games, um, obstacle courses, things like that. And that's just a way to get a lot of kids involved. And you have some level of competition, but it's really the focus is on fun. And that would be a good way to just get your name out there. And then this is something that you've mentioned in the past, but you could also produce almost like a miniature version of Hard Knocks or something like that,
Yeah.
where you follow a team around, like a youth team around. You
Yeah.
do interviews, you film the game, you do interviews after the game, things like that. And maybe you have like a Instagram page or something like that dedicated to that, and people can just follow along with the team over the course of the season, and you could follow a different team every season. So I don't even know if like all of these things that we're mentioning, I feel like we could do them to an extent. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of is it worth our time and is there going to be, ROI there?
Yeah. And I still, for the record, like that HBO Hard Knocks parody. And not just because it was my idea. I like it because I think it's something that's executable. Like we can actually do that. With the right like group of people, we can kind of set it up and do. And it might be in a situation where it like produces really cool content that we can like have people actually follow on social and see like the next quote unquote episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I had forgotten about that. But
Yeah. I
it's a
think
good
it I
reminder.
think it could work for sure.
Uh,
And then just the last question that I had is at the very end of our conversation, Connor basically told aspiring founders that starting a company will cost more than you think. So, I mean, me and you both know kind of like
yeah.
from a financial standpoint, it has cost more than what we thought. But what are some of the like non-monetary costs of starting a business that you didn't necessarily anticipate?
I mean, the obvious one I think is time, like the amount of time that you have to devote. Um, I think with a business, you're going to spend money or time. That's the currency. Money for obvious reason, time maybe for a little less obvious reasons, but like that's been the biggest thing that has, I guess you can say, surprised me is the amount of time it takes, or is required to really get a venture off the ground. And we haven't necessarily even got it off the ground because we haven't launched, but like to get to this point, it required a lot of time. And maybe the other is something that I did expect, but like it's just a kind of a forewarning for any would be founders out there. that it requires a great deal of effort as well. So time and effort. So you have money, which may be a bit more obvious as sort of people always highlight like funding and finance rounds and things like that because they realize it's going to take a lot of money to scale a business or get a business started. But it also requires a great deal of time and a great deal of effort. Like you gotta really want it because there's going to be a lot of situations that really try you and a lot of people that really try you, and you got to be willing to push through and to have that genuine effort to get it to where it needs to be in order for you to like even think about success. So time and effort. I know there's a bunch of other things, but like those are the two main ones. And since you took the low level fruit last time, I'm going to take all those low hanging fruit this time.
Yeah, time was definitely one that I was going to bring up. And then for me, the other one is just it's the level of uncertainty and kind of the mental toll that can take on you. So you never really know what is working, what's not working, what's going to resonate with people, what's not going to resonate with people until you get sales.
Yeah.
So, especially for us, like we spend a lot of time pre-launch and we think that we're going in the right direction. We think that we're going to be able to sell the product, but you never really know. And there's a ton of different decisions, kind of like we were saying before, there's always these trees in the road and you have to go forward, you have to choose a path to go down, and you never really know that it's the right path until either your company is just like super successful or there's something that you see where you're like, dang, I took the wrong path, like I got to go back and choose a different path and like go through this uncertainty again until basically I my company is super successful or I get thrown back into this to the beginning of the tree again. So for me, I
Yeah.
think that just takes a little bit of a toll because we've had that kind of experience a couple of times where we're like, yes, we're going down the right path. We're confident that this is the right path. And then after months or however long, we're like, oh, that was the wrong path. We got to go back to the drawing board. And there's just a lot of that. So you think a lot of times if you're like an entrepreneurial person, you kind of think like, oh yeah, this initial idea I have is this is the one. Like I just got to execute it and a year from now, I'll be a millionaire, but it's not really like that.
No, no, we envisioned it as such, but yeah, that's not in reality how it necessarily works out. And definitely didn't work out like for that work out like that in our case.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
will, but like right now we're still in the grind.
Yep, yep. Well, I mean that's all I had in terms of questions.
Yeah, I'm not. I think that's the episode. I think that's the episode.
Cool. Well, it was another good one. I mean, it's fun to talk to Connor and always fun to I don't know, I like talking to people who have these kind of unique ideas where I'm like, I never really thought about that, but that makes sense. So wishing him
Yeah.
well. I know we haven't talked to him in a while, but hope he's doing well.
Yeah. And maybe it's like a uh kind of a an announcement, a public address for those who've been following along with this podcast format. The idea is to switch it up a little bit. So this is going to be one of our last and what we've dubbed as like the Monday morning quarterback, like going back and doing a I guess a review of sort on the episode, on the conversation that we have with a founder. Now it's going to be a much more real time, I guess, situation where we interact and we kind of pose these questions or have these type of conversations and this type of dialogue, real time with the founder and not kind of looking back on it as a Monday morning quarterback analyst. So, cool. All right. Well, until next time.
Yep, until next time.
All right, man.
See ya.
See ya.